everybody, and welcome to the music rating, ranking, and reviewing podcast we like to call Music Meltdown, which we rate, rank, and review any artist or the discography, songs, albums, what have you, and sort of give our opinions and overall rating and ranking of all of them. This episode, we're doing the big one, the big kahuna, if you will, talking about the Beatles. Band I have an interesting history with, to put it lightly. This will be going up after Lennon, after Harrison, and after McCartney. So you already know my stance on those three discographies. But how do I feel about them as a unit with Pete Best? That being said, my knowledge going into this, I knew all of these records decently well. I've probably heard all of them 2 or 3 times. And I like the Beatles. I'll leave it there, but I like them. Rich, your thoughts on the Beatles going into this?
Yeah, I was a fan back when I was a teenager. I subscribed to Rolling Stone magazine, and they did a special issue on Sergeant Pepper, in celebration of it was 20 years ago today. So that was 1987. I was 16 or 17, and I bought the album because of that article, and I just quickly became a fan and really got into especially their later period. But yeah, I'm a big fan going way back.
Nice. And in case you haven't picked up on it before, Harvey, your thoughts on the Beatles? You got the shirt.
Yeah, so I've loved the Beatles. So I'm 26. It's been about half my life now, which is exciting. There's been points where my favorite band has sort of, or favorite artist have sort of alternated. It was Led Zeppelin for a while, but I feel like I've always come back to the Beatles being my favorite. I don't think there's not a discography I know better than their ones. I don't know the amount of times I've listened to all these albums, but it's a lot over 10 years.
For what it's worth, I'll say this now. I do like the Beatles more than Led Zeppelin, so that'll add some interesting discussion for whenever I do that episode. That being said, 13 records. I know that people always talk about including Magical Mystery Tour and Yellow Submarine, but I've literally never seen anybody not include them, so I don't get it. That being said, we're going to go one at a time, and I'm going to kick things off because, as the intro may have alluded to, I'm maybe a less Beatles fan than the other two people here. But at the bottom for me, I'm going to have With the Beatles. I used to like this one a lot less than I do now. And while I still think that it's a lot weaker than Please Please Me, I don't think that this is a bad record. I have it at 2.5 stars. I think it's all right. Despite that, it starts out pretty strong. I like the stretch of It Won't Be Long to Little Child a good bit, but there's a massive lull for me. Till There Was You through I Want to Be Your Man, just to be brutally honest, they don't do anything for me. It just feels really bland and a bit by numbers for them at that point. I do really like towards the end Devil in Her Heart, though. To me, though, it's just a little bit of a less energized, less interesting take upon the debut record. And I just think that it's okay. I have the 2.5 stars, but it's not terrible. And there are some quite good songs in it for what it's worth.
All right. Wow, that's pretty damn low for a Beatles record. Okay. My number 13, I've got A Hard Day's Night from 1964, their third album, not counting American releases, of course. A very good album that shows the Beatles' progression up to this point. I think it can generally be said that the Beatles continued to improve throughout their career, even though their album tracks don't always reflect that progression, which is why I don't have these in chronological order. This is the first album in which all the songs were written by the band, John Lennon and Paul McCartney specifically. George Harrison doesn't contribute any songwriting. But he does sing "I'm Happy Just to Dance with You," which could be called filler, but it's good filler. George Harrison's 12-string Rickenbacker playing here would prove to be hugely influential on bands like the Byrds. Uh, but the only songs I rate 5 stars are "And I Love Her" and "Can't Buy Me Love." Um, although the title track, "I Should Have Known Better" and "You Can't Do That" are at 4.5 for me. The title track opens the album, starting off with a single special guitar chord before launching into a super energetic and catchy melody. The harmonica on "I Should Have Known Better" is just addictive. The rest of the album is very strong. The only weak track is the last one, "I'll Be Back," but it's still decent. Incidentally, drummer Ringo Starr coined the term "Hard Day's Night." After a long day in the studio, he remarked, "It's been a hard day." And then noticing it was already nighttime, he tacked on "Day's Night." Ringo was known for his funny little phrases, and this became the title for the hit movie as well as the album. Lennon and McCartney were tasked with writing a song to order with the title already set for the first time, and they did not disappoint. The song is great. The movie's a lot of fun. It was hugely influential. I saw it long ago, but I don't really remember too much about it. But anyway, I've got "A Hard Day's Night" at 4 stars. Very good.
I gotta say, you like that one a good bit more than me, but having that at the bottom, that's a choice right there.
You got to make tough choices with the Beatles.
I mean,
Okay. Oh, did you?
are the bottom few really that tough of choices though? Like the band is great, but most people I've seen kind of agree the earlier stuff is weaker. But we'll see. We'll see.
Okay, so I'm also already at 4 stars for number 13. I know. I'm probably staying aligned with most super fans. I think usually at the bottom I've got Yellow Submarine, their first from 1969, only because it's the least essential of the ones. It's kind of loose whether it's an album. I usually count it, as does everyone else, but pretty loose definition of an album. The only 4 new tracks that were done by the Beatles. You've also got the George Martin orchestral score, which is pleasant and whimsical, and I listen to it when I listen to the album. It's just not my preferred Beatles. But that being said, the Beatles tracks are all great. I think "Hey Bulldog" and "It's All Too Much" in particular are fantastic. And "All Together Now" and "Only a Northern Song" are good as well. And I like the 2 songs that appeared before as well a good bit. So yeah, even though it's my last place, it's still one I listen to quite a bit. I think it's really good, and also the movie is really good too. So 4 stars.
Yeah, that one's not going to appear for a little bit on my list. I really dislike when people just kind of poo-poo it to the bottom because I think that there's really great stuff all across it, and I love the orchestral side, but I'll get to that later. Number 12 for me, not sure where this one's going to place for you guys, but I have Beatles for Sale. This one is a slight step up for me. I have this one at 3 stars. And despite the lower score, once again, there are some really good songs here. I love No Reply. I'm a Loser is great. And Every Little Thing is also really strong. But much like with the Beatles, there's a bunch of really meh cuts on here for me. Stuff like Rock and Roll Music, and I Don't Want to Spoil the Party brings it down. And I understand that this is due to time restraints, but it is a bit of a shame that they went back to doing half covers on this record compared to A Hard Day's Night. It's not bad, but equally to me, not very noteworthy. And something I'll bring up now, as it kind of does play into something I'm not really as into when they do blues. I don't think that they really do it all that great. I don't think it plays into their sound all that well. It's especially notable their early bluesier stuff on Past Masters Volume 1. But whenever they do it on these earlier records, I just simply don't really connect with it nearly as much. It's not bad, just not necessarily my preference. But yeah, number 12, Beatles for Sale, 3 stars.
All right, cool. My number 12 is the Yellow Submarine soundtrack from 1969, their 11th album. I think this one is actually great. You get a great A side of Beatles songs, and I actually think that George Martin's soundtrack score on side B is excellent as well. But the Beatles were mildly criticized at the time for giving less than their usual value for money. Beatles fans were essentially paying a full album price for just 4 new songs, as Yellow Submarine, the song, and All You Need Is Love had been previously released long before. But the new songs are truly excellent. Only a Northern Song, written by George Harrison, is a wacky psychedelic sonic excursion, while Hey Bulldog, I think it's one of their best songs, featuring some sick McCartney bass. George also wrote It's All Too Much, a celebration of LSD and an appropriately psychedelic freakout. And Altogether Now is a charming children's song. I think the animated film is really entertaining too, from what I recall. Um, but even though George Martin's orchestral score on side B is delightfully charming, it's not really what anyone wants to hear when they put on a Beatles album. They want to hear the Beatles. And since you only get 4 new Beatles songs here, I put it near the bottom. But what's here is excellent. So I'm at 4.5 stars.
Okay. So my number 12 is going to be With the Beatles. I have it at 4 stars. I think it's really good. Um, Sort of agree with what Adrian said. Even though I'm much higher on it overall, that the start I think is my favorite bit. It won't be long, and those first few, I think until Till There Was You, I like quite a bit. Don't really like Little Child. That's probably my least favorite Beatles song. I just think that's a pretty weak one, but I do have it a step below their debut because I think some of the covers are a little weaker, even though I do love Till There Was You and Devil in Our Hearts. Um, and there's a point where I think you can tell that they've got such passion for their original tracks that the covers don't really hit as hard, which is great when they move on to all originals on A Hard Day's Night and pretty much from there onwards. But this is great. It's full of great energy, really melodic, great singing, great performances, great instrumentations. I'm going to probably say that a lot. So this is a really good album. And I think that early Beatles maybe deserve a bit more love. I do go back to early Beatles quite a bit. So 4 stars for With the Beatles.
Alrighty. Number 11 for me is going to be Abbey Road. Get it. It's Please Please Me. Overall, I think this is a solid debut record. The band clearly has a ton of energy and a lot of passion for the music that they're making across this. And it's an overall enjoyable listen. However, to me, it does feel a bit scattered from the best songs, and it often tends to shift in styles a bit, which I don't inherently have an issue with, but I feel like they clearly do the pop rock stuff way better than the other stuff on this record, so I kind of just wish it was all the former. Notably, A Taste of Honey is was my least favorite on here. Despite that, there are some great tracks on this record. Anna, the title track, Love Me Do, and then the final two, There's a Place and Twist and Shout, are great. It's nothing extraordinary, but I think that it's a fun listen, and I could go back to it. I still only have it at 3 stars. It's a decent record, but it's an enjoyable listen for what it is.
Yeah, I thought you said Abbey Road.
Yeah, we'll get there.
Okay. Um, I'm glad that wasn't Abbey Road. All right. My number 11 is with the Beatles from 1963, their second album. With the Beatles came 8 months to the day after their debut, Please Please Me. It's loaded with great songs and energy. Lennon and McCartney write about half of the material, and George has his songwriting debut on a Beatles album with Don't Bother Me, which is excellent.
Sorry, my
Uh,
internet went out there.
yeah, you're fine. All My Loving was Paul McCartney's finest, most sophisticated song to date. I love the walking bass line and the rapidly strummed electric guitars. Little Child is a short song, rather slight, but still made great by the Beatles. Till There Was You sounds like it belongs in a musical, beautifully sung by McCartney. Please Mr. Postman is a song originally sung by the Marvelettes. It starts off with a bang, and I wish they could have maintained that intensity for the remainder of the song, but it's still excellent, a real firecracker. They covered the blues-based rocker Roll Over Beethoven, written by Chuck Berry. George Harrison sings on that one. Really good. Hold Me Tight is kind of a Please Please Me retread, but it's still very, very good. The only song that's not really very catchy is Not a Second Time, but 6 of these songs I've got at 5 stars, and most of the rest of this album is quite strong. So I've got it at 4.5 stars.
Adrian, what was your 11? I cut off as you were saying it.
Please Please Me.
Oh,
Okay, so
yeah.
Please Please Me is going to be my number 11, their debut. I think it's really good, 4 stars again. To be honest, I think with the British invasion, all those bands, I think out of the gate, it's pretty clear that the Beatles were something else, to be honest. I think their debut is actually the strongest of all those bands. Songs like I Saw Her Standing There, You Want to Know a Secret, I think Show Why, their cover of Twist and Shout is iconic for a good reason. John Lennon's vocal performance on there is great, and got a bit above with the Beatles because I think their sort of youth and energy shines a bit more on this record other than with the Beatles, which was still good there, but I think it's you can tell that they're excited to be in the studio and making a record, all those years of practicing, and the fact that they did most of this in one day is just incredible. And yeah, I think even at the debut, I think you can tell that you're only really scratching the surface with them. So 4 stars again for Please Please Me.
Okay. I think Please Please Me it's better than England's Newest Hitmakers, comparable to Kinks, but I kind of think it's hard to compare to other ones that came later. Like I'd say I prefer the Small Faces debut and the Who's debut, but that might be a bit later to compare for what it's worth. But anyways, next up for me, I have A Hard Day's Night. Notably their best record up to this point, in my opinion, and it's the first of their records without any covers. It's still inconsistent though, but there's nothing that I genuinely dislike across this record. And there's plenty of great songs, including the title track, I'm Happy Just to Dance With You, and Can't Buy Me Love. And overall, the band just feels a lot tighter. They're better at the sound that they have now. And overall, it just comes together for a better listen. My favorite songs here are If I Fell and I'll Be Back. But this is a good album. It's nothing amazing for me. I have it 3.5 stars, but I'd go back to this for what it is. It's good.
Okay, my number 10 is Beatles for Sale from 1964, their 4th album. Beatles for Sale beats the previous 3 in part because there are no weak tracks on it. They were pretty worn out by this point from having been constantly on the go for the previous year and a half, and I think that's reflected in the music to some degree. They revert back to relying excuse me. They revert back to relying on covers, most of which turned out to be excellent. Bob Dylan's influence is felt on a Beatles album for the first time with I'm a Loser. The Buddy Holly cover, Words of Love, is excellent. I particularly love the intro and outro guitar. Ringo usually got a chance to sing one song on each album, and here he turns in a great version of Carl Perkins' Honey Don't, which is utterly charming, as Ringo always is. They get a little bit country on I Want to Spoil the Party, sung by Lennon. What You're Doing has an unusually awful instrumental break, which is probably a reflection of how tired they were at this point, but it still manages to be an excellent song. The last track has George singing the Carl Perkins number, Everybody's Trying to Be My Baby, and it's freaking great. Another 4.5-star album.
Okay, so I've also got Beatles for Sale at number 10. I think this one's maybe a little underappreciated. I know it's quite tough, saying a Beatles album is underrated or underappreciated, but I think, like Rich said, that you can really tell that they were feeling the pressure of being out on the road all the time. And this record was rushed out before Christmas of '64, which is another reason why they sound so tired, and another reason why they reverted back to some covers. I do agree. I think what Rich said at the start is that they were always musically evolving. And even though I have a Hard Day's Night above this one, I do think this is a good step into what they would eventually do with Help and Rubber Soul, with sort of the more folk stuff. You've got a bit of country in there, a bit of rockabilly, which I think is reflected in the covers they chose. And yeah, I don't have a problem with any of the covers. I think they're all good, and I think the originals are even better. I think No Reply is their best opener so far. I'll Follow the Sun is pretty great pull track. And 8 Days a Week, that one's a classic. And yeah, all the covers are good as well. I do like the Ringo songs on Beatles albums. I think they're really charming. And I didn't say it when we were doing with the Beatles, but I like the Beatles version of I Want to Be Your Man better than the Stones by quite a bit. So yeah, I love the sort of, like you're saying, the sort of, you can feel like Dylan's sort of influence on them as well. And it's a little bit like a warm up for Rubber Soul, I guess you could say, which is going to come out a couple albums later. But yeah, I think all the songs are good. I'm close to 4.5, but this is going to be my last 4 stars.
Okay. We still got a couple before I'm at 4 stars, so that's cool. Next up for me, I feel like you're saying Beatles for Sale is underappreciated. I'd say this is the only real Beatles record I would call fully underappreciated, underrated. Yellow Submarine. Overall, this is a good record. By far the most disregarded of any of their records, and I don't really get why. Sure, it's not a full Beatles records, but I really enjoy George Martin's orchestral half. I think it's an incredibly strong score, but I'm a huge sucker for orchestration and music. We all know how much I love Yellow here. So the Beatles half for me, it's honestly a bit spotty. Having 2 songs that were on prior albums and a couple of middling cuts like all together now. Of course, McCartney did that one, but I enjoy all the other originals a good bit. Only a Northern Song is really good. Same with It's All Too Much, and Hey Bulldog is really good, although maybe a bit overrated. This is a solid album, and I do think that it's better than the ones that I talked about. But overall, I would still call it kind of unremarkable. Have it at 3.5 stars.
All right, cool. My number 9 is the debut, Please Please Me. Like Harvey said, it's amazing that the bulk of this album was recorded in one day, the 11th of February, 1963. As a result, it's a very immediate sounding album with no frills. Sometime after 10 p.m. for the last song of the day, John Lennon, who was suffering from a nasty cold, absolutely shredded his voice to produce a phenomenal take of Twist and Shout, possibly the greatest rock and roll vocal performance ever recorded. It was done in one take. They did attempt a second tape, but John's voice was gone at that point. 8 of these songs are Lennon McCartney originals. Some of this music has a rather old-fashioned, dated style, such as Ask Me Why, P.S. I Love You, and Baby It's You. the latter of which was a hit for the Shirelles. And it is excellent, as is P.S. I Love You. The opener, I Saw Her Standing There, remains one of the Beatles' best songs, a fantastic upbeat rocker. Misery has a cool little extra guitar and piano flourishes, piano played by producer George Martin, who really deserved his reputation as the fifth Beatle. He was instrumental to the Beatles' success and played on a lot of their songs, especially piano and organ. Jerry Goffin and Carole King wrote Chains, originally sung by the Cookies in 1962. George Harrison sings on the playful Lennon-McCartney penned Do You Want to Know a Secret? Over half of these songs are excellent, with the only weak spot being There's a Place, although that one's still decent and the lyrics are good. Overall, this is a very special debut. They really knocked it out of the park. And with this album, they took the world by storm. Excellent, but I'm still at 4.5 stars.
Okay, so I am moving up to 4.5 stars for my number 9. I've got their last album, Let It Be, 4.5 stars. I think it's great. I don't know if you'll have it at 4.5 stars, but I think you're going to have this one quite high up. I feel like with Let It Be, if you're more of a Stones person, you're more likely to have this record higher up. Sort of a theory I've always had. It's a bit more bluesy, a bit more sort of Stonesy as well. It's not all the way through, but it's definitely got some of their trademarks. But I think this album is great. I really love the sort of the faux live feel. I think it's really cool. All the studio chatter. The title track is, I think, one of the best songs of all time. It's got some of Paul's best lyrics. One of his, I think that's one of his all-time best. And you've got a couple good George Harrison cuts, I Me Mine and For You Blue are great. I think at this point he was sort of hoarding his stuff, maybe for himself, for his not his solo debut because he had a couple out before, but All Things Must Pass, his big blockbuster album that everyone knows and loves. And I like how you've got sort of John and Paul sort of interplaying with each other, which you hadn't really seen since Sergeant Pepper's. I love Two of Us, and I love I've Got a Feeling. One After 909 as well. They do that sort of duet interplay lead vocals, which I think is really cool. The one thing I do not like about this album is The Long and Winding Road. I think 213 Beatles songs, I think that is the only one where I don't like the production. I think Phil Spector went a little too far with that one. I figured you might disagree. I would have preferred it as stripped down, like I think McCartney originally planned. I think that version sounds much better. But that being said, everything else on here is great. All the songs are good. Get Back is great. Dig a Pony is a good bluesy song. And Across the Universe is also one of their best songs and one of John's best songs. So 4.5 stars for a great album, Let It Be.
Didn't go far enough on The Long and Winding Road. I want all that orchestration. Give me more of that across the full record. People say
I think Phil went a little too far with that one. I love the orchestration, but that one, the choir as well, I can do without.
I mean, he went far with other things in his life. He didn't go far enough with the orchestration. But anyways, I want to point out that's the first one I've gotten right, I'm pretty sure, on the prediction list that I did for you. So
I've gotten all of them right so far.
Wow. Smart man. Next up, I got Help. This is a bounce back after the weaker Beatles for Sale. It's where they began to use a bit more acoustic and mellow out the sound a bit, and they show off that is excellent. As you've mentioned, maybe a bit of Dylan influence on here. Tracks like You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, You're Gonna Lose That Girl, and the absolutely perfect Yesterday. But there are also some solid rockers. The Night Before is great, and obviously the title track. And Ringo does well on this first singing number, Act Naturally. If I'm being honest, I kind of wish Ringo got more songs. I feel like he got a little bit shafted. I feel like he could have probably had 2 songs on most records instead of the one. I don't want, like, a Ringo album. There's a reason I didn't do him, but I do think they could have done with a couple more songs in the catalog, especially on the White Album, where it's like you have two across 30 tracks. Come on. Couldn't have given him a third one, but it is what it is. However, a lot of the songs I didn't mention, I think are just all right. And while it lacks front to back greatness, I would say that this is by far my favorite of the initial run of records that they did. I have this one at 3.5.
Okay, fair enough. So my number 8 is also Help from 1965, their fifth album. Help represents another huge leap forward in the Beatles' development. John's songwriting in particular shines on such stellar tracks as the title track, the Dylan influenced You've Got to Hide Your Love Away, and especially Ticket to Ride. The drums on that one are so iconic with that beat and the little drum rolls at the choruses. Ringo Starr is such a phenomenal drummer, so creative. And Ringo turns in a great singing performance on Act Naturally, as Adrienne mentioned. That was a #1 song on the country charts for Buck Owens and the Buckaroos in 1963. I've Just Seen It Face has a great up-tempo train beat, and Tell Me What You See has some cool keyboard played on a Hohner pianette. But the biggest star of the show has got to be McCartney's towering Yesterday, which he performed with a string quartet and no other Beatles. It could be considered their first excursion into the Baroque pop world. It's one of their best songs and the most covered song of all time. Not everything here is excellent, though. George Harrison unfortunately contributes the two weakest songs. You Like Me Too Much is a bit too jaunty and la-di-da for my tastes. And I Need You is the first truly weak song to appear on a Beatles album. The guitar in particular is just so limp on that one. 2 stars for that one. The only Beatles song I rate lower than 3 stars, unless you count What's the New Mary Jane, which I think is just awful. That would have to be 1 or 1.5 stars. Just well. But the excellent songs on Help are so good that they're good enough to overcome these setbacks and good enough for me to go up to 5 stars.
Okay, so that's the universal number 8, it seems. I've also got Help at number 8. I have it at a very strong 4.5 stars. I think the tracks on here are excellent. I think this is a clear step up from Beatles for Sale, and I think it's a nice transition period into what they would eventually do on Rubber Soul and Revolver. Title track obviously is great. I think that's Lennon's best lyrics up until that point and shows more of that emotional vulnerability that he'd become known for. I think The Night Before is a very melodic Paul song. You've Got to Hide Your Love Away. That's like very Dylan-esque, and I just love the acoustic feel. I Need You would agree that that's a weaker track on there. There is one I think is a little weaker, which is Dizzy Miss Lizzy, which doesn't fit at all. I think that's probably what cost it. That's probably what cost it the 5 stars for me. Is Yesterday is such the perfect closer, and then you've got that sort of tacked on the end. That's really the only thing I don't like about this album, because everything else is great. You're Gonna Lose That Girl is great. Another Girl, Ticket to Ride, love that drum part. Act Naturally, another cool Ringo cover. I like You Like Me Too Much. I like the jauntiness. And Yesterday, obviously, is just a towering achievement in just music history. But my favorite song on here is actually I've Just Seen a Face. I just love sort of the feeling to that one and the 12-string guitars. I think that's just such a cool sound, and I love the sort of the fast up-tempo-ness. It's sort of like the feeling when you fall in love. Just super fast and melodic, just like how I like my Paul songs. So yeah, I just think this is great, and I think it also shows. I think Lennon starts off being the strongest writer, but I think it's around here where I think Paul starts to overtake him in my mind, as I'd say the greatest songwriter ever. So I know you disagree, but yeah, I've got this one at a very strong 4.5 stars.
Okay. Yeah, don't quite agree on McCartney being the greatest songwriter of all time, but it is what it is. This is where I'm gonna get shot. Okay. Yep. Number 7 is the White Album. I assume at the very least top 3 for both of you. Yeah, I'm just gonna cut to the chase. This record's a bloated mess. It has no reason to be this long, and even with some incredible tracks, I doubt I'll listen to this in full anytime soon at all. Back in the USSR is a really great opener. I think Dear Prudence and Glass Onion work really well coming after it. Absolutely hate Oblada. It just annoys me on every level. It's pretty much everything terrible about Paul in a nutshell. Just incredibly artificial, and the chorus is sickening. Wild Honey Pie as well is just absolutely dreadful. Bungalow Bill is okay, and I adore While My Guitar Gently Weeps. I think by this point, it's pretty blatantly obvious to me George is by far the most talented Beatle. I might prefer Lennon more, but I think that George at this point is he's the best writer. He's by far the best guitarist and instrumentalist of the group. Just really excellent musician to me. And Happiness is a Warm Gun is also very strong. But even halfway through the record, it's incredibly unbalanced. I do really like Birthday, and Everybody's Got Something to Hide Except Me and My Monkey is really cool. Long, Long, Long was actually the highlight of one of my listens. Didn't quite crack into my top 10, but I kind of forgot that song. I think it's really great. Loved it. But everything after it kind of comes across as filler to me. I don't hate Revolution number 9, but I don't understand why this is on the record to begin with. I think it's cool as sort of an avant-garde sort of music collage piece, but why do we need this 8-minute avant-garde music collage piece on a Beatles album that's already too long? Like, no. And Goodnight is a really lovely closer, but you don't really need it. At the end of the day, I just don't simply want or need most of what this record provides. When it's great, it's among the band's best material, but a decent bit of the time it just comes across as really scattered and almost odd for the point of just doing that. I would a low 4 stars. I could potentially see this going down to 3.5 if I continue to listen. I do think that it's really good, but incredibly overrated, and George Martin was absolutely correct. Trim this down to a single record, probably their best album. But yeah, 4 stars, White Album.
All right, Adrienne giving Beatles fans something to hate. They might hate this choice. This will surely be my most controversial placement. At number 7, I've got Revolver from 1966, their 7th studio album. This is a truly groundbreaking album, considered by many to be the Beatles' best. The opener, George's Taxman, is one of their best rockers, followed by the heartbreaking Eleanor Rigby, recorded with a double string quartet arranged by George Martin. The sad lyrics about lonely people and the execution of the song were unlike anything that came before it. There's some cool backwards guitar on I'm Only Sleeping, while George Harrison's East Indian influence track, Love to You, is excellent. McCartney's Here, There, and Everywhere is just sublime, and that's actually one of John Lennon's favorites. Was. The vocal harmonies may sound a bit old-fashioned, but they are really incredible. She Said, She Said is a weird Lennon song inspired by the time he took acid with George and Ringo and some members of the Byrds. Peter Fonda was there, freaking him out, talking about how he knew what it was like to be dead. And Lennon eventually asked him to leave the party. Other excellent contributions from McCartney include the supremely uplifting Good Day Sunshine and the Sad for No One, featuring a wonderful French horn. The last track, Tomorrow Never Knows, is possibly the trippiest, most psychedelic song they ever recorded. The Beatles were treating the recording studio as an instrument in its own right by this point, and the track contains such things as backwards guitar, Lennon's vocals recorded through a revolving Leslie speaker, sitar played backwards and sped up, and what sounds like seagulls, which is actually a recording of McCartney's laughter sped up. So, why is this album so low for me? The main reason is And Your Bird Can Sing, which I just don't find appealing. Sorry. Many people have praised the guitar on that one, but it just doesn't do it for me. And Lennon's Dr. Robert is really good, but still one of their weaker tracks, in my opinion. These might be minor quibbles, considering how mind-blowingly great the rest of the album is. But considering how truly excellent the rest of their catalog is, I have to split hairs, but it's easily 5 stars.
Okay, so number 7, this is going to be my last 4.5 stars, and it's probably one of the strongest 4.5 stars that I have. It's A Hard Day's Night. I think, you know, the tracks that open both sides of the record are just their best songs to that point. Can't Buy Me Love, or well, that's the end of side 1, I think, but Can't Buy Me Love and A Hard Day's Night, I think they're just excellent 5-star songs, just amazing pop songs. And I think for how early this was, the like album era hasn't really even kicked off yet here in 64, and I just think this is perfect. It's just quick pop songs after quick pop songs, good rock songs, all originals. Every song was written by John or Paul, and both of them. And I Love Her, I think, is a great Paul ballad. Things We Said Today is another great Paul ballad. I'm just going to keep, after you dissed over the D, I'm just going to keep saying the Paul songs I like. If I Fell, I really like the lyrics to that one. I Found Out Love was more than just holding hands. I'm Happy Just to Dance With You is a really fun song. Tell Me Why is a good sort of kind of sing-along song. You Can't Do That. That's the one that my boy Harry Nilsson would eventually sort of do his first ever mashup. Him doing all the Beatles covers on that. This is almost so close to 5 stars for me. I will say it kind of teeters a little. All the songs are good, but maybe the last 3 sort of Lennon songs on the album, after Things We Said Today, a bit more on the. I mean, the Beatles standards are so ridiculously high that they're still really good songs, but just don't really hit the same. So just almost 5 stars, but last 4.5. I'll be up to 5 after this.
Okay. Number 6 for me is Rubber Soul. Pretty big jump up from Help, in my opinion. Notably, they're going further into the folk and the psychedelia that they sort of toyed with on Help, more so the folk than psychedelia. And I do feel like this is a great way to grow their sound, and their writing has immensely jumped up from Help to this, in my opinion. Notably on songs like Michelle, Norwegian Wood, and Girl. I love all 3 of them. Probably my favorite track, or at the very least one of them, would be In My Life. I think that's really unfortunately like the number 11, just missing my top 10 songs later, but I love that song. And there are some solid rocking tracks here. Drive My Car is really good. I'm Looking Through You is also great. Sadly, though, despite how much I enjoy the best material here, there are some duds. Think for Yourself isn't great. The Word also doesn't do a ton for me. And I love Lennon, but man, what the hell were you doing on Run for Your Life? That's just problematic, to put it lightly. Despite that, though, 4 stars. I think it's a really good record, but just not quite great.
Yeah, I think, Run for Your Life, he's just adopting a character, It's not like it's something.
Well, it's not a very good character is the issue.
Yeah, but I mean, I don't think he's trying to say something about himself personally.
Is Lennon an art lover, though, do we think?
Well, to be fair, given what happened with Cynthia, it's arguable.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, moving on. Number 6, I've got Let It Be from 1970, their 13th studio album, if you include Yellow Submarine. The last one they released. The band initially went for a back to basics approach, which was eventually tossed out the window by the time Phil Spector became involved and added orchestral and choral overdubs to 3 tracks, including Paul's The Long and Winding Road, which offended McCartney to the point where he eventually released a version of the album without Spector's embellishment called Let It Be Naked. The band was also struggling with a lot of inner turmoil at this point, and some of that is documented on the recent Beatles Get Back documentary series released in 2021, which is a must-see for major Beatles fans. It actually shows the Beatles in the act of writing songs. Keyboardist Billy Preston was brought in to augment the sound and ease tensions. John Lennon was using heroin at this point with Yoko Ono. Despite all this, just about every song here is excellent. The title track is one of their best songs, although I don't think McCartney ever got a truly great guitar solo out of George Harrison, probably due to prevailing tensions. Despite the existence of 2 different versions of the song, each with a different Harrison guitar solo, don't think he quite nailed it. But Dig a Pony, Across the Universe, I've Got a Feeling, The Long and Winding Road, Get Back, and I Me Mine, which is George's lament for his own tendency towards self-centeredness. All are 5-star songs in my book. Two of Us is close. Even tossed off numbers like Maggie May and One After 909, which John wrote when he was 17, are highly enjoyable. This album might rank a bit too high on my list, according to some, but I have a strong attachment to it. Many fond memories, especially from the time that my dad bought this tape for me so we could listen to it on our road trip to the Grand Canyon. We hiked all the way down and stayed overnight at Phantom Ranch and hiked out the next day. I always associate this album with that trip. Anyway, 5 stars.
Yeah, don't worry, Rich. You don't have that record quite high enough, so you're doing good, my friend.
Okay, so my number 6 up to 5 stars, and not only am I up to 5 stars, the 6 records I have left are all in my top 15 albums of all time. I come on, I just love the Beatles. And I'm just sort of throwing that as a disclaimer because this is probably my most controversial placement. At number 6, I have Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, 5 stars in my top 15 albums of all time. And it's hard because you feel like you have to justify why you're putting it this low, but I think every good thing that has ever been said about this album is 100% deserves. Just the production is absolutely insane. I just love the George Martin is probably my favorite producer of all time. I think this album is just this album just shows why. Love the thematic elements, the fake band, just really creative stuff. The opener's great. I think With a Little Help from My Friends is probably the best Ringo song and the best he's ever sounded. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds, a great psychedelic track. And then you've got some really jaunty, fun Paul songs with Getting Better and Fixing a Hole. I love sort of the interplay with John and Paul on the former. It's getting better all the time. It can't get no worse. I think She's Leaving Home is really touching. Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite is awesome. For a while, that was my favorite Beatles songs. I just love how crazy that track is. Then you've got sort of George's Indian influence track Within You Without You, which is great. When I'm 64, which I know you probably hate, I think it's awesome. Lovely Lisa is just an awesome track all around. I just think it's such a perfectly constructed song. Just sort of like the sort of trash canny drum sounds. That song actually has my favorite bass line of all time. I just think the bass alone on that song is so catchy. I love it. I could listen to the isolated bass track just on its own. I think the lyrics are really funny. I love the kazoos. I just think that is just a perfectly constructed song. Um, and it's great. And of course, A Day in the Life is just fantastic with the studio work. It's one of the most creative songs ever. And I'd say just John and Paul working together, that's the best thing that came out of that. Just them two strictly collaborating together, even though it's not in my top 10. Just sort of, I think it really shows sort of the common ground they had, but also the differences with the different parts that they do, and just a masterpiece of studio work. And it's only my number 6, which means bands would kill to have this as their best record, but for me, they managed to top it 5 separate times, which is just amazing.
Okay. I'm just
Sure.
curious, because Rich posed not really a question, more so a statement. Sergeant Pepper's or Pet Sounds?
That sounds.
Hell yeah, it's Pet Sounds.
All
All right.
It's close. It's closer than I think it would be for you, but it's pretty tight. Pet Sounds is my second favorite album of all time, so
It's really tight.
it's a tight race, but it's Pet Sounds wins in that argument for me. But I love the Beach Boys, but the Beatles definitely overall are better for me.
I'm not sure. They're pretty equal for me, despite Beach Boys obviously having lower lows. Next up for me, Rich, you're not crazy. I have Revolver now. Um, this is probably one of the records I have the biggest issues getting into. The first time that I heard it, I loved it, but pretty much every time I listened, it kept getting lower. But I'm getting higher on it now. I have it at 4 stars. I think it's very good, but I do see how it could be great. But there are some flaws. Notably, Dr. Robert feels really out of place, despite being a good song. I'm not crazy about Love You Too. I think that that's maybe a bit too far into the psychedelia they were acting with. And big one, Good Day Sunshine is shit. Just really terrible, like Obla D. Way too poppy, way too happy. Just really gets on my nerves, if I'm being honest. Despite that, though, there are some absolutely incredible songs. Taxman is awesome. Eleanor Rigby is insane. I love I'm Only Sleeping. And my favorites, aside from that, are Here, There, and Everywhere. And Your Bird Can Sing. And my absolute favorite is For No One. While very flawed, I do understand why others love this record. As I showed earlier, I own this on vinyl. It's the only Beatles album that I own on vinyl. And I do get it. I think this is a very strong album that unfortunately Paul McCartney was allowed to add A Good Day Sunshine to. 4 stars. Very good record.
Okay. All right, my number 5 is Rubber Soul from 1965, their 6th album. And I'm just crazy about this album. Every song I've got at 5 stars except Wait, which is a lesser McCartney number, but I still love it. And If I Needed Someone by George Harrison, which is merely good. Everything else 5 stars. Drive My Car, Norwegian Wood, Nowhere Man, Michelle, Girl. In My Life is particularly great. George Martin said of Rubber Soul, it was the first time to present a new growing Beatles to the world. For the first time, we began to think of albums as art on their own, as complete entities. McCartney sings part of the enticing Michelle in French. The piano solo on In My Life was played by George Martin. He recorded it at half speed, which allowed him to achieve the right tempo and the quick speed he was after. Norwegian Wood, This Bird Has Flown, features a prominent sitar. Incidentally, sitarist legend Ravi Shankar, who tutored George Harrison, hated this song. Engineer Norman Smith has noted how difficult it is to record the sitar satisfactorily. In regard to recording it for this song, he said, "It is very hard to record because it has a lot of nasty peaks and a very complex waveform. my meter would be going right over into the red, into distortion, without getting audible value for money. I could have used a limiter, but that would have meant losing the sonorous quality. But obviously, he eventually got it right. Ringo's vocal contribution to the album is the country tinge to what goes on. Damn, excuse me. For which he also got his first co-songwriting credit on a Beatles album, sharing it with Lennon and McCartney. The last track, Run for Your Life, written and sung by John Lennon, sung from the point of view of a rather terrifying character who threatens the life of his girlfriend. Lennon once said it is his least favorite Beatles song, understandably, considering the history that Adrienne mentioned. But it rocks. This is just a really great album. Another 5 stars.
Okay, that is also my number 5, Rubber Soul. 5 stars, a top 15 album for me of all time. I think this album is absolutely perfect. You've got Drive My Car, which is just like a great sort of R&B rock song. Norwegian Wood, I think, is absolutely sensational. I love the sitar on it. I love the lyrics. I think they're some of Lennon's cleverest lyrics. You Won't See Me is a great McCartney song. I think the harmonies on this whole album, I think, are absolutely insane. I think it's one of my favorite albums strictly for harmonies ever. I just think it's so perfectly arranged. Quick note about You Won't See Me. If you've ever, this is something I've always thought. If you've seen the movie School of Rock, You Won't See Me, the la 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 bit, they sound so much like Zach's song in School of Rock. Bit of an offside, but Nowhere Man, another great harmony track, more great lyrics. Just the introspection in the lyrics, I think, shows huge growth. And this is also when they really started experimenting in the studio. They've got tons of different instruments on here. I think the word is really catchy. Michelle, another great McCartney ballad, sort of love song. What Goes On, I know people kind of like to or whatever on that one, but I think it kind of fits on the album perfectly. I like the sort of country tunes, Ringo songs, like I said. Girl, the sort of backing vocals are great. I'm Looking Through You, sort of a great rock song. In My Life, it's called, it's the sped up piano, but was incredibly influential. Run for Your Life is probably my least favorite song on there, but I think it's a good song, even though it's a little questionable. But I think this album is absolutely sensational, start to finish. I have it at an incredibly easy 5 stars.
Yeah, not quite getting there yet. However, this is going to be my last 4-star record, so I do have at least 3 Beatles records I would call great. There you go. Golf clap. Number 4 for me, though, have a feeling this one's going to be higher for somebody, and somebody has already talked about. I have Sgt. Pepper's. Despite me having some glaring issues with this record as a whole, I can't deny that this was the best record by the Beatles up to this point. I love the title track and the way it plays into Ringo's A Little Help from My Friends, which I probably do agree that's probably his best song. Although I do really like Octopus's Garden. This is going to be controversial, but I don't really like Lucy all that much. Lennon's vocals and the verse kind of annoy me, and I just find it to be a case of the verses are fine, but the chorus is really the main reason I'm there. Getting Better and Fix a Hole are both fun little cuts, and I absolutely adore She's Leaving Home. By far my favorite on the album and the entire catalog up to that point. And Being for the Benefit of Mr. Kite is good. I don't like Within You Without You very much. I feel like they're pushing the psychedelia to its limits without having all that much of a great song to back it up. It's kind of annoying, but I do really like Lovely Rita after it. And the closer, Day in the Life, obviously sensational. While still a very good record, I do think that there are notable points that I just simply don't care for as much as other ones. It's a damn solid 4 stars, and there is a great record somewhere here, but as a whole, just very good for me. 4 stars.
All right. My number 4, and this is tough. I really wanted to place it higher. Damn, coughing this morning. I've got for number 4, Magical Mystery Tour from 1967, their 9th album. In this case, we are counting the American album because the original British release was a peculiar double EP with a gatefold sleeve and 28-page booklet. On the full album that most people know, the original EP makes up the first side, while the second side is comprised of singles from the same era. This is my favorite era of the band, the psychedelic Summer of Love era. It's their most psychedelic music, particularly I Am the Walrus, which is just a mind blower. You get Strawberry Fields Forever, undoubtedly one of their best songs. The Beatles actually recorded 2 different versions of the song, which were then spliced together for the final master. In case you're wondering where the splice is, it's exactly 60 seconds into the song. Strawberry Fields is John's ode to his childhood in Liverpool. It was first released as a double A-side with Paul's wonderful Penny Lane, also on the album, and also an ode to their hometown of Liverpool. I give every song on this album 5 stars, except for George Harrison's Blue Jay Way, although that one is still very good, just not as good as the others. 4 stars for that song. The album closes with the classic All You Need Is Love, which really encapsulates the 1967 Summer of Love flower power movement. Much of the recording was made during a simultaneous broadcast on June 25th, the first ever multinational television satellite link up. It was seen by upwards of 400 million people. This is a truly amazing, mind-expanding album and a personal favorite. But in my attempt to rate and rank this music objectively, I've got a few ahead of it.
Okay, that is also my number 4, Magical Mystery Tour. I have it at 5 stars, and not only is it 5 stars, but it is a top 10 album for me of all time. We're in top 10 albums ever territory for me. They've got 4 of them, which is insane. If you include a certain Paul McCartney album, that means the Beatles or members of the Beatles take up 50% of my top 10. But Magical Mystery Tour, I'm just going to keep saying it. Perfect album. Title track is fantastic, sort of expanding on the concept of Sergeant Pepper's, but I think they do it a little bit better here. I love the lyrics on Fall of the Hill. I think that's some of Paul's best sort of lyrics, and I love the recorder solo on it. Just give me the recorder solo all day. Flying is a cool instrumental. I really do like Blue Jay Way. I like the psychedelic Beatles stuff a lot. Your Mother Should Know, which Adrian probably hates. I just think it's absolutely fantastic. I love the Jaunty Paul stuff. I think they're so much fun. And I Am the Walrus is absolutely mind blowing. I love the lyrics. I think it's everything psychedelic music's about, sort of all the crazy sounds. Just an insanely good song. And then you get the second side with all the singles. I just think that's just phenomenal songs. I love the bass line on Hello Goodbye. And then you've got the big ones, Strawberry Field Forever and Penny Lane. I think that is the best. The double A side, I think it's the best single ever released. I think it's 2 of the best songs ever recorded. I just love those 2 songs so much. I think it's the peak of the competitive rivalry with John and Paul. I think it's their best songs they ever wrote for Beatles albums. There's one Paul song I like more than Penny Lane that he wrote. Baby You're a Rich Man, I really like. Love it from The Social Network. I think it's perfectly placed in the movie. And of course, All You Need Is Love is a classic, good sing-along song that Oasis tried to sort of appropriate with All Around the World or whatever their one's called. But 5 stars, perfect album, top 10.
Alrighty. Let's just keep talking about it. Number 3, Magical Mystery Tour. Fun fact, actually totally forgot about this record when I made my top 10 songs list, and it'd have a couple in there, so bit of a shame, so put a little asterisk by my list, but it is what it is. And I know it's technically cheating putting this album so high, as it's not really a Beatles album, but I can't deny it being one of their best and most complete track listing. For me, at least, there isn't a single dud here, and the B side, while just a bunch of singles, is really outstanding. I really like the title track on here. Full on the Hill is great. Blue Jay Way is really interesting and works out very well. You are correct that Your Mother Should Know is the weak link of this half, but it's still good. I Am the Walrus is just exceptional. The Oasis version is a little bit better, but this one's very good as well. This had to throw that in there. Second half is just excellent. Hello Goodbye is a great pop tune. Strawberry Fields Forever and Penny Lane complement each other brilliantly. And All You Need Is Love is just an incredible album closer. Would have definitely been somewhere in my top 10 if I would have remembered it. Well, not really a true record. I still think that it's a better overall piece of work than most other Beatles records. I have this at 4.5 stars. It's a great album, really great listen. Highly recommended. Gotta listen to the Master Plan by Oasis, though. That's when you get the best stuff from this record.
Cuckoo. You crazy.
No,
All
I'm
right.
just trying to piss off Harvey. It's all good.
I have
All
listened to the
right.
cover that Oasis did. I didn't hate it. I thought it was okay.
It's live, so that probably helps it out. Get a little bit of the crowd noise blocking out the Gallaghers for you.
Okay, my number 3 is Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band from 1967. Their 8th album. This is the first Beatles album I ever got. Got it on vinyl when I was 17. I mentioned that at the beginning of the video. I consider it a masterpiece. By this point, the Beatles refused to tour so they could focus solely on working in the studio. I would say this album represents the pinnacle of their inventiveness in the studio. They were always experimenting with recording techniques in search of a different sound. For example, engineer Jeff Emmerich would put sticky tape on the recording heads to make the tape wobbly. Some consider this to be the first concept album. The Beatles imagined they were actually Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, which spurred on their creativity. Excuse me. Mornings are a little rough for me sometimes. They rated the Abbey Road sound effects archive quite a lot for things like audience noises for the opening track and animal noises for the track Good Morning, Good Morning. Incidentally, Paul played the really dirty sounding guitar solo on Good Morning, Good Morning, a rarity as Harrison was almost always the lead guitarist. Every song on this album I give 5 stars, except George Harrison's East Indian flavored Within You, Without You, which is very good, but the local vocals get a little bit monotonous. There are plenty of drug references on the album, and drugs helped to unlock their creativity. Lucy in the Sky with Diamonds was clearly inspired by LSD, even though the Beatles denied it for many years. More recently, Paul has admitted that it was about LSD, though. She's Leaving Home is a gorgeous ballad by Paul McCartney with only classical music strings to accompany him, along with John joining him on backing vocals. Paul got Mike Leander to write the score, something George Martin would normally do, but Martin had other commitments at the time. George was very hurt that Paul didn't wait for him, but to his credit, he produced the session and conducted the musicians who played on it. Being for the benefit of Mr. Kite has a psychedelic circus quality. John Lennon's lyrics were derived almost entirely from a 19th century poster advertising a circus. I love all the swirling keyboard sounds on that one. which are really trippy. When I'm 64 is a delightful vaudeville music hall style number with a wonderful oboe. Lovely Rita, like Harvey, it's a personal favorite. Love the infectious rhythm, the lyrics, vocal melody, and all the sound effects. A Day in the Life is the monumental album closer, mostly a Lennon composition with a middle section written by Paul specifically for the song. It features two separate elongated orchestral crescendos after the Lennon line, I'd love to turn you on. In my opinion, the crescendos represent orgasms. They used a 40-piece orchestra, which they recorded 4 times on all 4 of the available 4-track tapes, which they then mixed down to 1. It was the equivalent of having 160 musicians. A Day in the Life gets my vote for greatest Beatles song ever, spoiler, and Ringo just kills it with his super creative drum fills as well. Incidentally, I dislike the new remixed version on streaming services. I especially dislike some of the added voices, but maybe I'm just so used to the old stereo master. They may have added things that were originally there on the mono version. Anyway, it kind of bugged me a little bit. And I'm not the only one. Recording engineer Jeff Emmerich has disparaged the new remixes, complaining that they got cleaned up too much and sanitized, removing some of the original artistic textures. Yeah, I came close to putting Magical Mystery Tour ahead of Sgt. Pepper's. It was damn close, but Pepper has 2 extra excellent songs, 2 more than Magical Mystery Tour, so just as it edges it out. Anyway, it's just a monumental album, just positively towering. Anyway, take it away, Harvey.
Okay, so my number 3, we're into top 5 albums of all time for me. I know. 5 stars once again for the White Album. I don't get what you're saying really. I think if there's any argument against George Martin being the 5th Beatle is that he was never down with this. Like, it isn't what the people want, more Beatles.
I speak for the people right now.
see that people want to cut this down to one disc, but what are you going to cut out? Because everything on here is great. I mean, I'm sure you'll tell me what you'd cut out later, but I could tell you everything great about this album, but that would literally just be me listing all 30 tracks on here. I think Obladi Oblada is great. It's so infectious. It's so catchy. It's everything great about Paul McCartney. I think the best way to describe it is just a huge variety show of all these sort of different styles that they were working with. And it's a double album, which means it's double the length. It's double the great songs. I don't know why you'd want to cut it. I think of any style of music that existed by 68, which is when this came out, and the chances are it's somewhere on this album. You've got sort of the gentle, folky acoustic tunes. You've got the ballads, the music hall, which I'm always down for, the sort of dance, the soul, experimental, psychedelic, country, hard rock, surf rock, pop, baroque, classical, and you've even got a heavy metal song in there. And I think that's just proof that they were pretty much masters of any genre at this point. And I think it's a welcome contrast to sort of the past few albums, which also featured a blend of styles, but it can typically be defined as a specific genre like folk with rubber soul, psychedelia with the few albums before this. And I think what is so amazing about this album is that it doesn't really fit into a box, and that's what makes it so unique. And what I love about the Beatles, and I'll bring this up, I think, with my next one, is that I don't think there's been a single act better at combining sort of the sort of experimentation along with the sort of traditional melodic stuff. And I think on the White Album, they're playing with all different moods across the mood spectrum. Some are happy, some are sad, some are meaningful, some are just silly, experimental, or just a mashup of all of those. I think there's something for everyone on here. And I think even though its length may appear daunting at first, I think it's very much worthwhile. I always listen to the full album when I'm doing this. I never skip a track. I've listened to it quite often, at least 2 times every month, I'd say. I think it's absolutely perfect. I think it's the best double album of all time. 5 stars, top 5 album.
How the hell do you have time for that? Okay.
You cut out there. Sorry, what did you say?
How the hell do you have time for that? Listen to that. Okay. I don't know. I don't hate it. I've probably seen harsher than how I actually feel about it. I just don't love the Beatles. And I think that there are flaws. I agree, they are showcasing all the styles that they do. They just do some of them worse. Anyways,
Like
top
what?
two.
Like what?
Like fucking Obla D.
No, that is a perfect song. Love it.
Yeah, perfect to throw into the goddamn bin. But anyways, on to the top two. We all share one. Now, do I kill the chance for a trifecta? I don't. And number two is Let It Be. Had this at 5 stars, dropped it to 4.5. I know not a standard choice, but as you can tell from my list, my opinions aren't exactly the most standard here to begin with. For me, it just has some of the best songs in the catalog, and much like Magical Mystery Tour, it just plays great for me front to back. I love Two of Us. Dig a Pony is excellent. I Mean Mine is just incredible, and the title track is a classic for a reason. If I had to guess, the guitar solo in that song is probably like a top 10 guitar solo all time for me. I don't get what you don't see in it. I love that thing front to back. That's what really blew me away the last time I listened to it, just how great that solo is for me. However, this record does tend to deviate a bit into blues, and this is by far the best examples of them doing blues ever. I've Got a Feeling and One After 909 are both very good. And despite Paul's choice, The Long and Winding Road is utterly superb. The production across the record is amazing, especially on that track. The added orchestration is just truly brilliant. Really helps to lift Paul because he does need that extra thing to help boost his material up. And I just think that the added orchestration from Phil Spector really does just elevate him to the level that he needs to be on that track. Admittedly, the last 2 songs are just okay. I wasn't crazy about 40 Blue or Get Back. Although I listened to Past Masters and I wasn't sure if there was any difference, but I did like the Get Back on that record. I'll have to go back and do 1-to-1 to see if there was any differences because I liked that one, but I didn't like it when I was listening to the record. So maybe that's just a me thing. But yeah, I just think that before those 2 songs, this record plays incredibly strongly to me. I think that it's a great record. Let It Be. 4.5 stars. One of their best.
Okay. My number 2, I've got the Beatles' White Album, 1968, their 10th album. I'm going to echo quite a bit of what Harvey said. This is the Beatles' much celebrated double album. Some people talk about how they should have selected choice tracks to make an even better single album. And I think this was noted. Producer George Martin actually wanted to do that. But I wouldn't cut a single one of these tracks. I give every song here 5 stars. Even Wild Honey Pie, which I think is a hoot. Revolution 9, just incredible, a real mind blower. I have most likely heard the White Album more times than any other album. I played it all the time in my car for years. The diversity found on this record is quite stunning, from the Beach Boys style opening rocker Back in the USSR to the tender lullaby Good Night at the end, sung by Ringo. from music hall to proto metal, folk to avant garde, and many points in between. An amazing smorgasbord. There are really too many songs to discuss, but my favorites are the incredibly moving George Harrison track, While My Guitar Gently Weeps. Sorry. And Cry Baby Cry. I don't know. There's just something about Cry Baby Cry that just gets to me. The piano and Ringo just kills it on drums. I think it's a really special song, and I used to play it over and over. Also of note is George's Victorian sounding Piggies with prominent harpsichord and Ringo's first full composition on a Beatles record, the country flavored Don't Pass Me By, which is just super enjoyable. George got one of his songs on each side of the album, and Ringo got a vocal on each disc. Unfortunately, tensions within the band had begun to set in by this time. George Harrison once said, by 1968, the rot had already set in. The Beatles tended to work more on their own songs alone, particularly Paul. Ringo even quit the band at one point for a couple of weeks, but the results are just positively superb. It's truly one of the greatest albums of all time, and the fact that you get twice as many Beatles songs that are all excellent means it's got to rate high. There's just one album that beats it, and we'll get to that shortly.
I gotta say real quick, power move from Ringo, by far being the least talented, having the least potential as a solo artist, being the first one to quit. That's a power move right there. I gotta say, like that's just funny to me.
Yeah.
So my number 2 is Revolver. I think it's extremely rare when an album is experimental, catchy, meaningful, fun, unique, beautiful, melodramatic, and influential all at the same time. But I think that is Revolver. On this album, you've got, I think, George's first truly amazing song in Taxman. You've got Eleanor Rigby, which is absolutely mind blowing. It's still amazing in 2023. I could only imagine what it was like just hearing that in 1966. You've got the dips into psychedelic music, which would kind of set up the biggest rock subgenre within the next few years. I'm Only Sleeping is amazing. She Said is amazing. You've got George's kind of first full track influenced by India music with Love You Too. And Good Day Sunshine, I think, is absolutely amazing. And that's obviously not to mention Tomorrow Never Knows. It's perhaps their most influential track, maybe. It's something no one had ever tried before. Few people have kind of tried stuff like it since. And I think the instrumentation on here is also maybe some of the best you'll ever hear. This is actually my favorite guitar album of all time. I think the guitar sounds on this album is absolutely to die for. Love those sort of jangly guitars. They just sound so amazing. I think this is also Ringo's best drum performance. I love sort of the harsher sounds. And I think it's greatly juxtaposed with sort of the really soft and luscious arrangement on some of the most haunting tracks, like the Paul songs. Got Eleanor Rigby, For No One, love the French horn on there. And Here, There, and Everywhere, which are just stunningly beautiful. I think it still sounds mind blowing, and I think that means it's even further than 56 years ahead of the curve.
Okay. Gotta say, did not expect this outcome, but one thing, if we're talking about favorite guitar albums, gotta mention my boy Bill Nelson, Bebop Deluxe. Ooh, the guitar on this record. Ooh, the guitar on this record. Man, I wish I was talking about this record instead. But anyways, not the outcome I saw coming. Of all the bands I would have predicted us to diverge on, the Beatles would be up there, but seemingly so, we all agree that the best Beatles record, Abbey Road. It's hard to really put anything else at the top for me. It's just a great record front to back. I don't have much to say that my other guests aren't going to and aren't going to say more, so I'll try and keep my notes minimal in comparison. But to me, it's their most complete work. Songs like Come Together, Something, Oh Darling, and Because are all great, and the suite in the back half is just stunning and a worthwhile experience for anybody that hasn't heard it before. This one has my favorite Beatles song in general, and it's none of the ones that I brought up before. I Want You, She's So Heavy is just insane. I adore that song front to back. It's a big dose of Beatles doing early hard rock, turning up the blues levels to 11, while Lennon is just wailing in a way that we haven't heard him do since Twist and Shout for me. Just absolutely sensational. And the end is the perfect way to add a career if only Her Majesty didn't exist and create the god awful atrocity that is Hidden Tracks, but it is what it is. I don't have much to add here. Just a really great record that I think everybody should hear. That I don't give 5 stars to. I think I need another listen, but I think I could see this one getting there. For now, it's at 4.5. My favorite Beatles album, Abbey Road. I gotta bring this up to Harvey. Do you want to know what record I just put above it in my 4.5 star ranking today?
It's probably a U2 album or something.
Spiderland by Slint, baby. Woo! But yeah, 4.5 stars. Great record.
All right. Yeah, it's cool that we got a trifecta. Let's see if I can make it through this without coughing. Abbey Road, my number one, 1969. Their 12th album released. It was the penultimate release, but the last one they recorded. The Beatles were able to largely sideline the ill will that had permeated the Let It Be sessions for one final hurrah. For me, Abbey Road is the pinnacle of the Beatles' music. This is the one where they really got down. It's perfection from start to finish, nothing less than 5 stars across the board. It starts off with the amazing rocker Come Together, maybe the coolest song ever recorded, followed by Something, surely one of the most gorgeous songs ever recorded. Then comes Paul's Maxwell Silver Hammer, which people tend to either love or hate. I used to not be so crazy about it, but I love it now. It's a music hall style number. They actually brought in a blacksmith's anvil for Ringo to bang on. Oh, Darling is sort of an old fashioned rock and roll ballad. It took Paul several attempts to get the vocal right. He would come in early to make a vocal attempt first thing to get a certain quality out of his voice that he wanted, like the kind of rasp you get first thing in the morning after you wake up. Although Paul did this in the early afternoon, the Beatles did a lot of their recording through the night, so Paul probably hadn't been up for too long when he attempted these vocals, which he eventually got right, of course. Then you have Ringo's supremely playful Octopus's Garden, which is just a delight. The Beatles recorded themselves blowing bubbles and making other sound effects for the recording. Everything is so great here. The supremely heavy I Want You, She's So Heavy, the delightful Here Comes the Sun, the mesmerizing Because. Then you get the extended medley, which is just phenomenal. So many great songs strung together, leading to the climax, the song called The End, which features Ringo's only drum solo on a Beatles record, and he just nails it. Then the Beatles sing, and in the end, the love you take is equal to the love you make. A nice thought, even though it's just bullshit magical thinking. But the album actually ends with a short surprise song tacked on at the end, as Adrian mentioned, comes several seconds after what sounds like the end of the album. Her Majesty was originally part of the medley, but Paul didn't like it, so he had it cut out and told John Kurlander, one of the engineers, to just throw it away. But John was trained to never throw things away. So he stuck it at the end of the rough mixtape they were working with. When Paul heard the playback, he liked hearing that at the end. So it was kept on the album as is. This explains why the song begins with a crashing guitar chord. It was actually the last song, the last note of Mean Mr. Mustard when Her Majesty was cut out of the rough mix of the medley. It also explains why the final acoustic guitar chord is missing. It's buried in that unreleased rough edit at the beginning of Polythene Pam. Just thought that was a little interesting aside. Anyway, Abbey Road gets my vote for greatest Beatles album. Surely one of the tippy top best albums ever recorded.
Okay, well, that is also my number one. 5 stars, obviously. I think armed with one of the most famous and recognizable images of all time is the album cover. I think they saved their best till last. I'm aware Let It Be exists, but that was recorded before this. I think they ended their legendary career with just a killer album in which all 4 Beatles are just at the very top of their game. I think I disagree with what you said about George being the best songwriter by the White Album, but I think by Abbey Road, he was definitely up there. He's got 2 of the most iconic songs of all time with Something and Here Comes the Sun. John provides the rockin' Come Together. I think it really sets the tone of the album well. And just a magnificent I Want You, She's So Heavy. I think that song is sensational. Paul has the super fun Maxwell Silver Hammer, which I think is an absolute delight. I think it's one of my favorite sort of granny music Paul songs. I love the piano that comes in. I love all the quirky sound effects. I think that song is just a blast. I think maybe one of his strongest vocal performances as well with Oh Darling. And you've got Ringo dipping his toes into the songwriting with The Jolly Octopus's Garden, which is absolutely delightful. I think that is an essential Ringo Starr song. But of course, the main event is the medley. And I think after some of the most beautiful harmonies ever recorded, and because we launch into the 20-minute long medley with all different songs, which just keeps getting progressively stronger and stronger, and until the ultimate music build up, climax, and ending of the last 3 medley songs. I think it's the straight ahead 20 minutes of music that is the all-time best. I think it should be played to anyone who wants to understand why the Beatles have the legacy that they do, as this is them at their best. And I think this is the Beatles' strongest album, and it is the strongest album of all time. It is my number 1 Beatles album, and that's how it stands in my overall album list. I think it's music at its peak.
Got me curious now where I actually have this overall. Give me one moment. I got this. I have a list of stuff here that I can make this done really quick. 66.
Well said, Harvey.
Thank you.
Totally agree with you there. So that's your number 1 album of all albums.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right.
That's my 106, so just outside of my top 100.
Oh boy, okay.
Hey, if it
You're
makes you
entitled
feel
to your opinion.
if it makes you feel any better, I do like Spiderland by Slint just a hair more. So, alrighty.
Oh boy.
Moving on to songs. Also, I figure I'll throw it out there. I don't hate Maxwell's Silver Hammer, but it's by far the weakest link on Abbey Road. And I'll come out and say it. I don't really care for Here Comes the Sun. I love Harrison, but I don't love that song at all. I think that's when it is most overrated. And in regards to like him being the best writer as of the time of the White Album, I think All Things Must Pass and the songs that he kind of had done around that time kind of play into that. But if you don't want to include that, that's fine. But,
well, it's just also because I like the songs that John and Paul were providing more than some of the tracks on All Things Must Pass.
It is what it is. Moving on to songs, a couple that just missed for me. Girl from Rubber Soul, While My Guitar Gently Weeps from the White Album, Never Give Me Your Money from Abbey Road, Two of Us from Let It Be, and A Day in the Life from Sgt. Pepper's. But my top 10, number 10, the only song from a record pre-Rubber Soul that I have on here, I have Help, not Help, I have Yesterday. Then I got a little Let It Be section here. Number 9, I have I Me Mine. Number 8, I have the title track, Let It Be. And number 7, I have Across the Universe. Number 6, I have Oh Darling from Abbey Road. Either this or Monkberry Moon Delight are my favorite McCartney vocal performance just in general. So, number 5, I have Helter Skelter from the White Album. Number 4, doing something rare, going to a non-album single. What? Hey Jude. 3, I got Something by George Harrison, just sensational. I think that this blows Here Comes the Sun out of the water for what it's worth. Just absolutely adore it. And Harrison's solo on this song is just sensational. Number 2, She's Leaving Home from Sgt. Pepper's. Long been one of my absolute favorites, if not my favorite. Just think that it's absolutely incredible. But my number 1, as I said earlier, I Want You, She's So Heavy from Abbey Road.
Very cool. Excellent list. Hard to go wrong with the Beatles, but yeah, I love everything you mentioned. All right, my top 10 Beatles. Number 10, I've got Hey Bulldog from Yellow Submarine. Number 9, I've got Let It Be from Let It Be. Number 8 is Come Together from Abbey Road. Number 7, Strawberry Fields Forever from Magical Mystery Tour. Number 6, While My Guitar Gently Weeps from the White Album. Number 5 is Ticket to Ride from Help. Number 4, I'm not including the long medley on Abbey Road just because it's almost an entire album side. But I am including the first song on the medley, You Never Give Me Your Money from Abbey Road. Number 3, I've got I Am the Walrus from Magical Mystery Tour. Number 2 is the song that I said was my favorite Beatles song for years, Cry Baby Cry from the White Album. But I've got to give it to A Day in the Life from Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. Just a masterpiece in and of itself, my number 1.
Okay, so I've got a pick in here that some people may not say really count, so I'll throw out Lovely Rita as sort of an honourable mention in case you feel cheated out. I've got number 10, I've got George Harrison's masterpiece, Something. Love the guitar solo on that. I love the lyrics, think it's perfect. 9 for No One from Revolver. Think it's one of Paul's best songs. I love the French horn in it. Really some of his best lyrics. Number 8, maybe a bit of a wild card in my list. I've got I've Just Seen a Face. I just really love sort of the really sort of almost bluegrass sort of thing. Number 7, Blackbird. Really touching lyrics. I love the sort of chirping sound effects, and it's the most iconic acoustic guitar song of all time. Sorry, Wonderwall. Number 6, I've got Norwegian Wood. Just super clever lyrics, some of John's best. Number 5 is where I've got Here Comes the Sun. I do love it a whole ton. I just think it's, another one of the most iconic sort of acoustic guitar songs of all time. I love sort of like, I don't know what it is. It's like a clarinet or something, or a Moog synthesizer that comes in. Just really cool sounding. Number 4 is where I've got the Abbey Road medley, which not sure, it depends on who you ask whether it counts or not. I would also, if I had to choose one song, I would also go You Never Give Me Your Money. Like I said, I think it's just 20 minutes of just amazing, just sort of ear candy. Number 3, I have Eleanor Rigby, just hauntingly beautiful, one of the most iconic songs of all time for good reason. And my top 2 work as a pair. I think 2 of the all-time greatest songs. I think the peak of John and Paul, number 2, Penny Lane, and number 1, Strawberry Fields Forever.
All right.
Yeah, solid. Solid. You didn't put any of that bullshit Paul in there that I hate, so I'm cool with that. But alrighty. Anyways, Beatles, cool band, interesting group, I gotta say.
All
Uh, you,
right.
you- sorry, you cut out for me there, Adrian. What did you say?
Beatles, interesting group, good music. We all seem to like this band around a similar level, don't we?
Hmm.
No, but yeah, the Beatles are great. I can obviously respect them and have a ton of love for their influence and whatnot. They just simply aren't one of my favorites. Even in the '60s, I probably prefer other artists. But I mean, for their best of best work and their greatest songs, I mean, they're incredible. I can't really say that much bad about them. It's just whenever you put them solo, I maybe I like them a bit more. We'll see.
They're a top 5 band for me. I guess they're Harvey's number one.
Maybe. I've heard he likes Oasis a good bit.
No, the Beatles are my number one, definitely.
They they'd make a top 100. I'm not so sure if they'd make my 50, but I like them a lot. I respect them a good bit for what it's worth. Although I don't know. Something about the records don't quite connect with me in the way that it does for most others. So it is what it is. Any final comments on this group, or because there's a couple of
I think I
cool
said it all.
bands,
I think this was so much fun to do, by the way.
for sure. We didn't go for nearly as long as I expected to, so that's cool.
No,
Which,
it's only 3:45 p.m. here.
yeah, only an hour and 45 minutes. That's not too bad.
Yeah, that's fine.
That being said, this was the Beatles. Kind of notable, kind of cool. I think I like them. We'll go with that. These guys like them a lot. That being said, I really hope that you enjoyed. I hope that my placement of the White Album didn't put anybody into cardiac arrest. That being said, you have a great time. Bye.